conjunction with the Ministry of Testing. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the chat and we'll try to address them toward the end of the webinar if there's time. And so without further ado, let me introduce Dennis Whalen, our Leading Edge QA Automation Solutions lead. Take it away, Dennis.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, or it's afternoon here where I am in beautiful, windy Columbus, Ohio. This is Kicking Butt with Karate. I am switching slides. I'm Dennis Whalen. I'm with Leading Edge, as I said, in Columbus, Ohio. I'm a QA Solutions lead there. I've got some contact info there if you want to reach out to me in the future. Got any questions about this presentation or anything else? There's my email. You can follow me on Twitter. I've got a blog there on the Dev2 blogging platform. And of course, my name is Dennis Whalen. You can connect to me on LinkedIn. So this talk was originally scheduled to happen in March at the Columbus Ministry of Testing meetup. So it was going to be a live in-person event. And unfortunately, we had to reschedule that. And it's a online event, but I definitely want to talk briefly about Ministry of Testing. This is the website for the meetup, for the Ministry of Testing meetup. You can check that out. Please join if you're not already a member. There's some good stuff there. The leadership team, I just wanted to point out quickly, the Ministry of Testing, if you kind of read this blurb, if you don't know what Ministry of Testing is, I think it's a good overview of what they do. They exist to advance software testing industry in a fun, safe, and professional, forward-thinking way. The meetups, which is what we're having today, exist to bring people together to talk and learn about good and authentic testing. So that's what Ministry of Testing is. You can see this gentleman here at the top, Ryan Quellhorst, is the organizer of the event. He does a great job. So hopefully Ryan's out there. If he was at the live meeting, probably what he would be doing right now is telling you where the food is, telling you where the restrooms are, things like that. But since I'm at home and you're probably at home, you probably know where your restroom is. And if you're anything like me, you probably have already spent a little bit too much time with the food. Thank you. That was a rim shot by my production assistant, Kyle. That's kind of the end of the special effects for the presentation, but I hope you enjoyed that. So let's talk about karate. Just a little bit of history. It was created by a gentleman named Peter Thomas. It was originally open sourced in February of 2017. So it's not new. It's probably, compared to its competitors for test automation, it's new. It's built with Java, and the current version is 0.9.5. So what is karate? And like a few things in this presentation, this comes directly from the Karate GitHub page. Karate is the only open source tool to combine API test automation, mocks, performance testing, and UI automation in a single unified framework. So that's from the GitHub page. I did want to just kind of briefly jump out to the GitHub page. If you haven't been out here, if you want to learn more about karate after this talk, this is the place one of the places to start. There is some very detailed documentation out here that will really help you get you on your way, some getting started stuff. When you get stuck, you're probably going to find your answer out here. Peter keeps us up to date, and it's very detailed. So this is a good place for you to go. As far as my presentation today, I have a few slides here, but for the most part, I'm just going to be showing some code and running some tests and talking about some of the features of karate. So not a whole lot of slides. So if you came for the slides, sorry. We got a few more, and then we'll get on into the demo. This session, I believe, is being recorded. So this is kind of our first go-round, and certainly the first go-round for me doing it as well online. So hopefully we have a recording we can share as well. I'm going to have a lot of material in the next hour. And if you have questions, there's a way to ask questions through the room. I don't know that I'll get to them. If I don't, I will come up with a way to follow up after the presentation. So let's talk about API testing. So this is a pretty basic diagram. You can see the web app servers there in the middle are basically your API endpoints, and provides a mechanism to view and update, delete data, maintain data, and the REST clients can be a number of things. You can have a browser, you could have a phone, you could have a smartwatch, all that can connect to the API endpoints. You guys probably already know all this. API test automation software kind of replace, or they act as a client, so they're going to be hitting the endpoints and verifying that they are getting the expected results back. So that's kind of what the architecture looks like in a nutshell. Again, the test automation is kind of replacing the clients. As far as API test automation tools, I've worked with most of these at some point. Karate, Postman, Rest Assured, JMeter. JMeter is more of a performance testing tool, but I've seen it used as API testing as well. SOAP UI, and then plain old Gherkin Cucumber, where you kind of build out the code that does your API tests. So these are some of the tools. I know there's more, but these are definitely the ones I've worked with at some point. So Karate is a DSL. So what is a DSL? DSL is a domain-specific language. It's a language with a purpose. So it's designed to handle special needs. So rather than a general purpose programming language like Java or C#. For example, SQL is a DSL for database queries, querying a database. XPath is a DSL for finding elements. YAML is a DSL for object serialization. So that's what a DSL is. What is Karate? Karate is a DSL for HTTP, JSON, and XML. And basically, it's going to simplify your life. So instead of writing 100 lines of code to do something related to API testing, you are going to have one or two liner that's going to allow you to do the same thing. So it's a toolkit that's focused on test automation. Certainly API testing, I think, is a strong point, but again, it also has UI testing, performance testing, mocks, etc. I'm going to spend most of this presentation talking about API testing. But be it API testing or UI testing, when you look at the Karate syntax, it looks a lot like Gherkin. So if you've done UI automation with Gherkin and Cucumber in the past, when you look at this, you're going to say, hey, that kind of looks familiar. It's a very detailed, much more detailed than BDD is supposed to be. And Peter says, and I believe this is true, Karate's not meant to be for true behavioral-driven development. It's more borrowing the Gherkin syntax from Cucumber, and I think you can think of it as more as like a mini programming language that you use for API test automation. So this is a place I have not been for a while, Great Clips. And I'm going to give you the purpose of this slide. You may be wondering. I'm going to give a little demo of Great Clips and get started. I'm kind of getting out of the slides now and on to the demo stuff. So let's get started with that. So step one, we are going to go to the Great Clips website. I've not had a chance to visit this awesome place. They give you haircuts. So I know everybody's kind of struggling with haircuts these days, but this is the website for Great Clips. So what I'm going to do here, I think what I'm going to do, wow, okay. So I'm going to find a salon. So I'm going to start entering my my zip code, and you can see as I do that, I've got a drop down that's listing cities that match this partial zip code, and as I change it, the list changes. So what's going on in the background is there's an API call being made, and it's passing in the zip code that I've entered. So if you look here, like go into your developers tools of your browser, and let's just do 450. So you can see right here, I'm hovering over this. It's probably pretty small. It's actually hard for me to see, so I'm guessing it's probably hard for you guys to see at all. But this is the API call that's being made when I enter 430. The browser is triggering on change. It's triggering that API call. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this as a curl request. I'm going to go into Postman. Postman is one of the many tools that does API testing and automation as well. So I'm going to go into just show you Postman a bit. I'm going to import that curl request that I just copied. So there it is. Click import. So now, make this a little bigger. Maybe this will help make it. The URL is up here at the top, and you can see the parameters that are passed to the API when I make a change to that zip code. So actually the zip code's down here. You can see that 430. That's the parameter that's getting passed on the API call. Country code, country code. So it's looking and I guess US and Canada perhaps, and a zip code starting with 430. So when I click send, again through Postman, you can kind of see the results here. So looks like there's a total number of results of 64 because it's a partial zip code. There's lots of cities that match that partial zip code. So just in general, this is an API call. I just kind of showing it in Postman because I think it's a little easier to visualize here. You can see the parameters, you can see the results. So that's kind of what we have here for our Postman API call. So let me get out of great clips here. So now what I want to do is get started with karate. So there's a couple ways to get started here. We can, again, we're going to be creating a Java project. This can be done a few different ways. A couple of them are you can use the karate Maven archetype to create a skeleton project. That's what I'm going to do. The other option is you could create the project and then manually add your dependencies to your POM file. If you're familiar with Java, that makes sense. If you're not, don't worry about it. It's not really necessary to understand a ton of Java to understand this demo, and I'll kind of walk you through the parts that are important. So here's the command line that I can use to create a base project that uses karate. So I'm just going to grab this guy, copy him. This artifact ID, April 21, that's today's date. That's going to be the project name that it creates. So I'm going to go here to the console. I'm going to paste that. I'm going to click enter. I'm going to say yes to that question. And I've just created a Java project that I'm going to use to demonstrate some of the karate features. So Visual Studio Code is what I'm going to use to demonstrate, to do the actual code demo. So I'm going to go here and open up this April 21 guide that I just created. So you can see, going to expand this here, expand my tests. I'll show you the POM file first, I guess. We won't look at that in detail, but you can see it has karate dependencies by default. So using that archetype kind of built this up by default. If I didn't use the archetype, I could obviously update the POM file manually. Let's take a look at what else we have. We have a feature file that's already kind of built in here as part of creating that skeleton project. And again, this is kind of, now we're going to start looking at some of the syntax of karate. And again, it probably looks a lot like gherkin and cucumber that you've seen in the past. There's a background. It's defining the URL. Turns out that's the endpoint that we're going to hit. You can see you've got your given, your when and then, things like that we see in Ruby cucumber, or I'm sorry, gherkin and cucumber. I do a lot with Ruby, so pardon if I say Ruby sometimes. a few things to point out here, like for example, this scenario, you can see we've defined a variable. It's a JSON object. So JSON is native to the syntax of Karate. That's one of the things that's different than your typical Gherkin style layout, is that Karate supports JSON out of the box. You don't have to write any custom code to deal with JSON. We mentioned that up front that Karate is a DSL. So for example, this given path users. So basically what that step is doing is it's building up a URL. But again, instead of writing my own method to build this URL, all I have to do is say, here's the path. It's going to combine that with URL defined in the background to build my endpoint. When I say method get, that's actually going to make a get request using that URL. So you can see when method get is 3 words. I would say there is no code there, but already I'm able to make a call to an endpoint. Status is 200. That's verifying the status that from that call is 200. So you can see this is a very powerful DSL. I'm not writing any code. There is no code behind this. Typically with Cucumber and Gherkin, you'd define your requirements in the Gherkin, and then the fun would begin where you build out your step definitions, you build your page objects if it's a UI test framework, but you've got a lot of coding to do once you're done with your Gherkin. In this scenario here, we have no code behind this that I'm writing. This is all handled as part of the Karate DSL. Another thing to point out is how we run this. So there's an add-on for Karate called Karate Runner, and you can see it here on the left side. If I expand it out, it's going to show me the features and scenarios that I have in my project. Whoops. So you can see sample Karate test script that matches up with the feature name above. And then we've got 2 scenarios. So if I want to just run this scenario, get all users, and then get the first user by ID, I can just click on it. Hopefully you can see down here in the terminal below that that's running. I'm not going to go through a lot of details of looking at those results right now. I just kind of wanted to show you, you can run it through the Karate Runner. You can also run it from the Karate Run here in the actual feature file. It's basically doing the same thing. If I wanted to run all of the scenarios in the feature, I can hit Karate Run up here, or I could have clicked the feature over there in the Karate Runner pane there on the left. That seems to be a little bit hung, so I'm not sure what's going on there. All right. I'll go ahead and kill that. Not sure what was going on there. That was hung. So anyway, that's basically a look at the couple of the base features that come with that skeleton file. If I want to run these tests from the command line, I think I killed my terminal. I can just do Maven clean test. Main. Okay. Oh, I think because, yeah, okay, I see the problem, because this second scenario is kind of incomplete, so it's kind of hung. So we'll ignore that for now. Sorry about that. So yeah, so that's kind of it. So you can see this kind of a mini programming language for UI testing. So now, with that being said, let's take a look at some little bit more interesting examples. Oops. There we go. Okay, so because I love Great Clips so much, I'm going to take a look at a feature file I created to test the Great Clips API. So you've kind of already seen this in Postman, so hopefully some of this looks familiar. But here's where we set up the URL. This is the same URL that you saw in Postman. this is how we define parameters. So we're going to pass country US. The username is Great Clips, starts with 430. So basically, this given is setting up that endpoint. So next is when method get. So that is actually going to fire off a GET request to that endpoint with those parameters. And when it returns, then we want to verify we have a status of 200. We're going to do a couple of asserts. I don't know if you remember, but the total request count was 64. I'm just kind of showing that you have access to the response. So once I do that GET, I have access to the response right here by default. The total records count response is going to be greater than 0 and less than 66. If it's not, test is going to fail. And I'm also going to match. This is another assertion where I'm verifying that all of each of the responses contain a country code of US and an admin name of Ohio, because I know that that zip code should be US Ohio. Some other things to note here is you can tag these scenarios and features just like you would your typical Gherkin, and that will allow you to run a subset of the scenarios from the command line using tags. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Let's take a look at, well, let's go ahead and run one of these. So I'm going to run this first one. Okay, so build success, that's good. This is a report that is generated by default. Again, I have done nothing really other than create that skeleton report, throw in some Gherkin-like syntax into this feature file. And whoops, sorry, let me do that again. And I'm going to have a report that I want to show you here. Here's my report. You can see it's got all the steps are green, so that's good. You can see there's a step for each line of the I'm going to call it Gherkin for lack of a better word. One thing interesting here is the method get. So when I expand that out, hopefully you can see a couple things here. There's a request. You can see the full URL that it's starting with. So there's my endpoint. There's my parameters, username, countries US, username Great Clips, name starts with 430. And then down here is my response. So you can see my response code was 200. What else is interesting here? You can see the actual JSON payload that came back. So you can see all the results that came back. And of course, you can see the tests that were successful. Stats code was 200. The asserts were, or the count was between 0 and 66, etc. What I always like to do, oops, is make sure this test is working. I want to make sure it fails when it's supposed to. So I'm going to change the results count to say it needs to be less than 60. So in theory, that should fail if this works as planned. So I see some red stuff, so that's a good thing. It failed. Let's go ahead and refresh this report. You can see response counts less than 60 failed, and you can see the reason. So hopefully that makes sense. And then let me close, make this a little smaller. Change this back so I don't have a broken test. I got one other one here I wanted to show you for Great Clips. This one is actually going to go ahead and go with a full zip code. So it's going to only return one response, or it should only return one response. Again, let's take a look at the asserts here. We want to make sure the status is 200. The result count is 1. And each of the results, each of the responses, and there'll only be one, contain the name Fairfield. That's because the city 45014, the city name is Fairfield, And then I can look at some of the other values in the response as well. I can make sure this field is a string. I'm not verifying the specific text, but I can verify it's a string. I can verify population as a number. I can even use regexes to look at the results that come back. So like this regex is saying the name is going to begin with an F and end with a D. I'm going to make sure latitude is not null, and I'm going to make sure longitude is present. So let's go ahead and run this one real quick. Okay, so that one failed. Let's take a look at why it failed. Okay, so what we see here is it failed on that last step where it's trying to match based on these values. And you can see when you expand that out that it failed on the name verification. What the actual value was Fairfield, expected the regex to be lowercase f, then some number of non-blank characters, and then end with a lowercase d. Well, the problem is the actual is an uppercase D, not a lowercase d. So let's go back and look at our how we might look to fix that. One way we could fix it is just to change this to an uppercase F, and it would pass. Another way to fix it, since I don't really care about case, is I'm just going to tell it to ignore case. So this regex will ignore the case of the response. So let's run this again. Hopefully this is green this time. Okay, good. So that's green. Let's make sure this is green. Holla. Okay, so that's good. So that brings us to the end of our awesome Great Clips API tests. I have some more things that I want to show you. Demo number 2. So this is a new endpoint. So this will be fun, something different. Everything is not Great Clips. This is Recipe Puppy. So this is an endpoint. I'm going to show you this in Postman real quick, or not quick, depending. So this is my endpoint. I'm going to send it. Let's show it in JSON format, so you can see this is the response that comes back. So basically, this is providing you access to recipes, and you can define ingredients. That's the I equals pepperoni. So this is basically returning me all the recipes that use the ingredient pepperoni. So that's kind of what that response looks like. Jump back over into the karate file here, the feature file. A few things I wanted to point out here is, again, the background. So the way backgrounds work is very similar to how they work, or I guess identical to how they work with Gherkin and Cucumber. You can do things in the background, and that whatever you do there applies to all the scenarios. So if I had 50 scenarios in this file, they would all have URL recipe puppy. So it's kind of basically the one-time things you want to do before any scenario you put in the background. So the next step, path equals API. That's basically appending /API to the URL. Another thing that's interesting here, you see it says get a recipe for ingredient. I'm going to talk a bit about that here in a minute. This is actually a scenario outline. So instead of going through this scenario one time and being done, this is a scenario outline. So you can see this examples table has ingredients. So there's a tomato ingredient, pepperoni, cheese. So the way this guy works is just like it does in regular Cucumber. It's going to run this scenario for each row in the examples table. So it's going to set the parameter. So you can see where it has ingredient here. Instead of hard coding the parameter to pepperoni or tomato or whatever, it's going to pull it from the examples table. So, and it's also, which is I think kind of cool, you can use that parameter in the title of your scenario as well, and you'll see that in the report. I'll show you that here in a second. So we set up the path, we set up the parameter, when method get, that's going to actually do a get to this endpoint with this parameter. We want to verify we have a status of 200. We want to make sure we have an array that comes back as our response. And again, we're going to look at the content of each value in the array. We want to make sure the title's a string, the href is a string, the ingredient contains the ingredient that we were searching for. That's important. We don't want to get recipes back that don't have pepperoni. That would be a problem. That would be a test that was failing, and we'd want to call that out. So that's one of the things we're verifying there with one line of code. Ignore this sleep stuff for a minute. This is going to be used in the future. Just trust me here, this is not doing anything at the moment. So basically, we're just validating our responses, and that's basically what this guy does. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. Okay, that was fast. It's all green, so that's good. I'm going to grab the link to the report, new link. So here's the report that was generated. You can see now we've got get a recipe for tomato. This is our parameterized scenario title, and get a recipe for pepperoni and get a recipe for cheese. These are all good ingredients, very tasty. And just kind of take a look at this get request here for tomato. You can see our request is the URL /API, because we set that as the path. And then there's our ingredient, tomato. So you can see that what we did in the feature file was used to build this endpoint. And then here's our response, 200. We got a 200 back. Here's here's our JSON response with all of the what was that? Tomato. All of the tomato recipes. Status code was 200. We had an array. All this stuff matched. We are ignoring that sleep stuff. So same thing with the pepperoni. If you look at the get request, you can see the ingredients pepperoni. For the cheese, you can see the ingredients cheese. So I just kind of wanted to show you how scenario outlines work with Karate. Very similar to Cucumber, but also a little bit more powerful in that you can parameterize some things like the title that you could not do in Cucumber. So let's go ahead. Again, I like to make things fail when I can. Let's just change title to be a number. So in theory, this should fail because title's not a number, right? Let's run this. Okay, got some red there. Let's refresh. So yeah, you can see it failed. Lots of detail here. But you can see down here at the bottom, expected title to be a number. So that's where the failure was. Okay, so that's our recipe puppy guy. Not sure when I changed here, but I'm gonna revert that just because I don't know. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is we kind of showed some basic API tests against some existing websites or some existing endpoints. I want to create my own endpoint, so I'm going to do that using something called JSON Server. Yeah, if you're familiar with that, I don't know, but let me just give you a quick 2-minute overview of JSON Server. It's a node package that allows you to, well, let's just read what the website says. Get a full fake REST API with 0 coding in less than 30 seconds. Seriously, and that is serious. I can demonstrate how that works. So if you haven't used it before, go check out the website on GitHub, JSON server. It gives you some instructions about how to install. We're going to create a JSON file with some data on it. We're going to start that server and tell it to watch this file. And so basically this file will be our simulated database. So we'll be able to do GET requests against a locally running version of JSON server. So I can do a GET request against localhost port 3000. I can post data and it'll get put into the file. I can update data, I can delete data. I'm going to show all that. But that's what JSON server is. So let's just go back over here to our next demo. Demo 3, add users. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is you can see my URL is going to be localhost 3000. So the first thing I need to do, start JSON server. And I'm going to be pointing to a file called db.json. You can name it whatever you want, but I like to follow the rules of the website, so that's what I'm doing, or the pattern anyway. So that's going to start an instance on localhost 3000 pointing at this file. So just real quick, if I jump over here, host :3000 / users. So see, that's the guy that's in my db.json file. So basically, this is the app I'm going to be testing with my karate feature. So this scenario is going to add some users to the to that file. So basically, I'm going to be calling a post. I'm going to be making a post call. You can see when method post here. We're going to be verifying its status code of 201. But what's interesting here is it's a scenario outline, but I don't have a list of users. I need to add new users, but I don't have a list of users. So what is this users thing down here? Well, in this situation, we're actually referencing a variable that was defined in the background. So the variable is reading from a file called user.csv in my test data subdirectory. So that's this guy right here. So basically what's happening here, it's going to read that. It's going to read that. It's going to read that file, and instead of hard coding that data into our examples table, it's a variable, and so it's more dynamic. The data is not hard coded in the scenario. So again, let's take a look through the scenario real quickly. Add user, and you can see it's referencing name. That is one of the columns, name, in the CSV that I'm going to be using. And I've got username, email, street zip, city zip, and I've got 4 users there. So so there's going to be, in the report, you'll see a scenario for each user. The path is users. Now we're going to define a variable called new user JSON. And that JSON is going to look like name. It's going to pull the name from that file. Username, email, address, etc., is all coming from the data in that file. So we created this new variable. We set it. Now we're defining the request. We're saying use this JSON as part of the request when we do the post. I'm going to comment out this. Keep seeing this pause stuff that I keep skipping over, but I'm going to talk about it. Trust me. Let's ignore that for now. So I'm going to do a post with this new user JSON data. When I do the post, I want to verify that the response has a status of 201, and I want to make sure the response contains new user JSON. So basically, the data that I post is going to come back on the response, or if it doesn't, this test will fail. So let's go ahead and just run this. Maybe it'll make more sense when you see the report, or even more sense. So here's the report. Okay, so here's the report. Remember, there were 4 users in that file: Kristen, Danny, Henrietta Hazeltine, and 2 Tobin. Let's look at the post for one of these. You can see here's the request. This time it was a post because we said method post. Here's the endpoint. Here's the data we posted. You can see the data we posted in the report. And then the response, you can see 201. So that's a good thing. And then remember I mentioned the response will also contain the data that was posted. So we will see that as well as the ID. So this is basically the ID that was used to when the data was inserted. So same thing with these other users. Go back here. So I wanted to show one other thing here. That was a file with 4 users in it. I have another file here called users large, which is a larger file, turns out. So I'm gonna use that one instead of just users and see what happens here. So I think there's 100 users in there that I'm gonna load. So it's gonna go through this scenario 100 times. So let's go ahead and run that. Chugga. Okay, it failed. So let's see. Let's not look at the report at the minute. See if we can figure out why this thing failed. So it looks like a subset of them failed. We had 100. A subset of them failed. Let's see. Connection refused. So my theory is I have overwhelmed JSON server with 100 requests back to back. So if I run it again, which is, as a tester, the first thing I do when something fails is run it again. I had 8 errors this time. Let's just run it again. See what happens. Okay, that failed again. I had 4 errors. So it's not consistently failing. I think it's just overwhelming JSON server. And this is what's going on. I'm going to uncomment this stuff now. So basically what this is doing is putting in a pause. So before every post, it's pausing for 50 milliseconds. Nobody likes the pause or the sleep typically, but certainly for what we're doing here, this is kind of locally testing, kind of overwhelming a local instance of JSON server. I don't want to do that. And I also wanted to show you this because it's showing another one of Karate's features, and that's the ability to reach out to Java code outside of your Karate feature file. So what's going on here is there's a variable called pause function, which is a JavaScript function. It's going to accept a number of milliseconds, and then it's going to call a Java sleep method to sleep for 50 milliseconds. So if this all works as planned, I'm going to run this again, and before each post, it's going to pause 50 milliseconds to hopefully let JSON server catch its breath here. So let's see if this passes this time. Seems a little slower, so that would 50 milliseconds. Okay, so good. Everything's green, so we're good, except no, because we're testers, because even if it's green, we don't really trust it, so we run it again. Let's run it again. Make sure it's really fixed. Okay, I'm going to call that fixed. So there we go. We addressed that issue. So now I want to take a look at another demo here, demo 4. We're going to use our same endpoint. I'm going to go, let's take a, I do want to show you the JSON file just so you can see all of the, you can see here on the left, kind of an idea of how much data we've added to this file. All this was kind of handled by our Karate tests that we're using that CSV file. And also, of course, JSON server was processing those requests. So you can see we started with a file with 10 rows in it. Now it's got 4,600 in it. So you can see what's happened there. Also, I should probably point out This terminal window shows the requests that came into JSON server. So you can see every single post request that came in. You can see how many milliseconds it took. So kind of interesting. I'm going to revert all those changes I just made to the JSON, the DB.JSON. And I'm actually going to revert this too. Okay, let me show you one more API scenario here that I want you to see. And that is demo number 4. So this shows us, one second here, sorry. Just want to make sure I didn't have any emergencies there. Okay, so this is again using the JSON endpoint, the JSON server endpoint. This time we're going to add a user, which we already did, so that should look familiar. One thing I'll point out is here's the new user JSON. This time I'm calling him Jim Tester, and I've got this other variable I've defined called reordered new user. So it's basically the same user, but things are in a different order than what I'm going to post. So path is users. My request is new user JSON, just like before. I'm going to post that. I want to make sure I have a status of 201, and I want to make sure my response that comes back contains reordered new JSON. The reason I want to show you this is to show you that when it does this compare, it doesn't care about the order of the data in the JSON object that it's comparing. It's making sure that the content matches regardless of order, or it should be. So that's where I'm going to compare. I'm going to make sure the response contains the reordered new JSON, which is a different order than what I've posted. I also want to make sure I have an ID that's not null, because I'm adding this guy, so I want to make sure it's a not null. And then I'm saving these. I've created these two variables to save off the ID and the name for a continuation of the scenario down below. So let's just run this guy first. Okay, successful. Let's take a look at the report. Okay, so you can see basically this should look familiar. When we posted it, here's the guy we posted, Jim Tester. Here's what came back. Comes back, looks like it came back in the same order as how I posted it, but you can also see that when the match response contains the reordered JSON passed, as well as the ID not being null. Let's take a look at the response here. There's your ID too, so that's not null. So that passed, so that's good. What I want to do next here is I'm going to update that user. So I'm going to give him a new name. His original name, and let's just go look at DB.JSON real quick. You can see there's Jim Tester that's been added. That was his original name. So now I'm going to run this again, which will add another user. Then I'm going to change that user's name to Jim Tester, I've been updated. So you can see, again, path. I'm passing the original ID. So basically that's going to allow me to update the data that I posted in the previous step here. So it's going to be path/users/3, because the next guy I'm going to add is going to have an ID of 3. I'm going to set the request. I'm doing a patch, so I'm just going to update one field. So the only thing I'm passing in the request is the name, and the name is new name, and the new name is Jim Tester, I've been updated. I'm going to do method patch. I'm going to verify the status code is 200, and I want to make sure the ID is the same as the original ID. I want to make sure the name is the new name, and I also want to make sure the username contains new user JSON.username. So Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, that's green. Let's take a look at our DB.json. So here's the guy we just added, ID3. There he is, Jim Tester. I've been updated. Let's take a look at the report. So you can see, here's the patch. You can see, again, user 3. If you look at what we posted, what came back was ID3. So then we reuse that ID when we do the patch. So again, ID3. And there's the data that's the data we updated. And then it brings back the full response in the response as well, the full object. Okay. So what else do we want to do here? So we've added the user, we've updated the user. So why don't we go ahead and delete the user? Okay, so let's just take a look at this third part here, this delete. I put this pause in, which now should look familiar. I'm going to pause for 5 seconds. The reason is I just want to show you that the data does go into the DB.json file. I want you to see it there. So it'll kind of pause for 5 seconds, and then it will delete it. So it will, again, the path will be user slash, this new one will be ID4, I guess. The method's going to be delete, and we want to make sure we have a 200. So let's run this. Let's run over here to DB.json. We should get something added here. There it is. See, there's ID4. Now that'll sit there for 5 seconds. And there it got deleted. You can see our build was successful. Let's go take a look at our data, our report, I'm sorry. So you can see now we have a delete. User 4. It was a delete. All good. So that's kind of that. There's a couple more things here I was going to show, but I'm running a little short on time. So I'm going to skip those. These were just trying to delete something that wasn't there. So I wanted to make sure I got a 404, etc. So I'm going to roll this back. I'm probably not going to get to the performance testing stuff today. I do want to show the UI testing stuff real quick. I have 8 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So this is the 5th and final demo. This is a UI test. So this is going to go out to the leading edge website. I'm going to spell it correctly. And I think it's going to click on the Ideas tab and look for some stuff. So Ideas is where we have some blog posts. You can see actually there's an event coming up, which is today's event, Kicking Butt with Karate. There's also a contact link here where you can contact us about openings, etc. But the reason I wanted to show you that is because I want to show you how I'm going to test that. So again, this is a UI test. So this is going to open a browser, and it's going to do some stuff. And if you're familiar with UI testing with Gherkin and Cucumber, this should look familiar. It's just a little bit more detailed than you would typically see with BDD typed Gherkin. But we're going to go to google.com. We're going to enter leading edge. We're going to click this button. We're going to wait for the URL, or we're going to wait for that page to come back, leadingedge.com. Then I'm going to look for a hyperlink that says API testing and more, kicking butt with karate. That was the thing we saw in the upper left of the page. And I'm going to click on the ideas link, make sure there's a blog post out there called Automated API Testing with Karate. And then I'm going to click on the contact link and make sure there is text that says proudly headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. So if you've worked with Cucumber and Gherkin, you know, typically this would be step 1 of building your UI test. You would then have to do your step definitions, your page objects, all that stuff. With karate, I don't have to do any of that. So this is the work. I have not written any code to do this other than understanding how to interact with the karate DSL, knowing what I'm looking for, what I want to test. So let's just go ahead and run this guy. Okay, browser opening. Type leading edge. Now it should go to the ideas page. There's ideas. Then it should go to the contact page. There's contact. And it should be done. Okay. So it's green. So that's good. Take a look here at this report. So yeah, you can see this should look familiar to you by now. These are all the steps that were in that feature file, and it's all super cool. It's all green, and then of course, finally, I like to make it fail, make sure that this is working as it should. So I'm going to misspell karate. Yeah, and I think that's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to hit run. Okay, so now it's looking for karate misspelled, and it's not finding it. And you might be able to see there in the background in the terminal, it did just retry 3. So it's trying. It tried for a while to find that before it gave up. So let's go see what this report looks like. Okay, so this step failed, as we knew it would. The rest of the steps are yellow, which means they didn't run. In a scenario, once something fails, everything that follows is done. It does not run. But you can see here when you expand that, it tried 3 times looking for this text. Didn't find it. So that's a failure. And that's why we failed. Jump back, fix it, run it. Ideas page, contact page. Okay, good. All green. Okay, so I am going to wrap it up there. I'm not going to have time to go through questions, but I will do that probably later on this week and see if we can come up with a way to, assuming there's some questions, that I can get back with people. I did not get through everything I wanted to, which disappoints me a little bit, but maybe we'll do another one of these sometime. But I also wanted to show how you can use Gatling to do performance testing, and basically you can reuse your API tests that you spend a lot of time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears building. You can reuse those for performance testing. So I've been a performance tester in the past, and a lot of times you'll see that these people come in, they kind of have specialized skills. They have to kind of rebuild scripts, load test scripts to execute, and they're usually off in their own little room working, and typically I don't really know what they're doing unless I am the performance tester. Then hopefully I do. But with karate, you can reuse your API tests to build load tests. And so it's pretty cool. It's a way to save some time and a way to save some money. So yeah. Let me jump back to the presentation real quick here. Next steps, I do want to point this out real quick. You want to learn more, go to YouTube, do this, karate DSL, do a search for that. This first hit here, this is Peter, who created karate. This is an hour and 30-minute intro to all the features of karate. He did this like 2 weeks ago. I watched it live. He did a great job. Highly recommend you go check that out. Here's some of the links that we talked about. There's the YouTube link I just showed you. Certainly the karate GitHub. Go check that out. The Karate Runner, that was that add-on JSON server we talked about, and of course the Ministry of Testing. Here's my contact info one more time. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Ryan, for helping to get this set up in Ministry of Testing. That is all I have. Ned, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Great. Hey, thanks, Dennis. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Thanks, everyone that was able to attend. We are trying to record it, so if the recording is successful, we will put that out on our Leading Edge YouTube channel and probably follow up in an email. And if you're interested in learning more about Leading Edge or partnering with us to help with projects or whatever that you may have, feel free to contact us at interested@leadingedge.com. And Leading Edge is spelled with a leading EDJE.com. So thanks again, Dennis. I appreciate everything you did. And if there are any questions, you can follow up with them later. And maybe we'll be able to do another one of these in the near future for you to cover some of that performance testing. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.